Hello, my name is Mike Stahlberger and I'm Director of Elections for Blue Earth County. For the next 60 or 70 minutes, I'm going to walk you through the Healthcare Facility Outreach Judge training. And what we're going to do here is provide you with the information you need to assist our voters who are residing in healthcare facilities to have them vote in the absentee or early voting process that we oftentimes refer to as Healthcare Facility Outreach. I'm going to switch over to the slides here and we'll get started with the training. Let me start out though by thanking you for your service to your community and especially to our service to our residents in these healthcare facilities as we work through these challenging times with COVID-19 and making sure that everyone has the ability to exercise their right to vote. Thank you. All right, so here we go. As I mentioned, healthcare facility outreach voting is a very important role on election day and for our activities that lead up to election day. What you'll learn as we work through here is that the election day is a different day for our folks that reside in the healthcare facility in terms of us bringing the election activities to their residences, their facilities, prior to the actual voting day that most Americans would exercise their right to vote. Your role allows us to ensure access to all eligible voters. It also helps us protect the integrity and accuracy of our elections process by helping those voters complete their ballots in a secure and complete fashion. And it also allows us to ensure the privacy of those voters by making sure that the processes we follow give those voters every right that they are entitled to in terms of their voting process and that they can do that in a way that is most comfortable and suitable to them. What we're going to cover in our training today is several things. We're going to start out by making sure that you understand the requirements for you to be trained as a healthcare facility outreach election judge or facility staff member. We're also going to talk about the difference between healthcare facility outreach voting and what's called agent delivery of absentee ballots. Very similar processes there. They result in the same end product of the voter being able to cast their ballots. However, there are differences in the processes we want you to be aware of. We also are going to talk about the definition of a healthcare facility to make sure we know what properties and facilities are eligible. And then we're going to spend more time talking about the actual physical procedures that you'll be following. We also have some training exercises and some frequently asked questions before I end with some contact information so you know who to reach out to in order to continue with the healthcare facility voting activities. Very simply put, to be trained for healthcare facility outreach, we've got a two-step process. Normally, we have election judges who become certified, who then become healthcare facility outreach judges, step 2. However, due to the 2020 special circumstances with COVID-19, we were able to have some healthcare facility staff members simply become trained as healthcare facility judges and essentially only complete this step 2, which is about 1 hour of training to make sure that they can provide assistance to the residences of their facilities. So like I said, normally a two-step process here, election judge training, and then you become certified to be healthcare facility outreach judges. However, in this instance, many of our healthcare facility judges are simply going to be staff members of the facility who have generously agreed to provide this service to their residents. Either way, we'll make sure that we get the training that you need delivered to you so that you're comfortable fulfilling these duties in your facilities. As we go through the training, we'll make sure that you're comfortable with the eligibility requirements, how to transport materials and keep them secure. We'll walk you through the application process for voters who wish to participate in healthcare facility voting, and we'll also go through the voting registration process. We'll also spend some time talking about what level of assistance and how you provide assistance to the voters. And then we'll also cover a little bit of safety training necessary for COVID-19. However, as staff members of these facilities, we're fairly confident that you are well trained and well suited to make sure that you are protecting the safety and well-being of your residents and yourself and your coworkers in the facilities. As I mentioned earlier, I do want to describe a very slight but important difference between two ways that our residents of these facilities can vote. What we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about today is the healthcare facility outreach voting, which is the process you're being trained on and the process that you'll be participating in and helping us facilitate in the next days and weeks. This is healthcare facility outreach. Voting is where the patients are permanent residents of the facility and they're going to vote through an absentee voting process on the day of the healthcare facility outreach activities in the facility. The key word there is the permanent residents. If you have temporary residents of the healthcare facility who do not have that as their permanent residence, they will not be able to use the healthcare facility outreach voting activity that you'll be bringing to them in your facility. They will need to use a process called agent delivery, or they'll also be able to vote by mail through the absentee voting process. The primary difference there is the residency status. Permanent residents of your facility can vote through healthcare facility outreach. Temporary residents of your facility must vote through a more traditional absentee process, either by mail or through agent delivery. Let's explain a little bit more about that agent delivery. For the 7 days preceding the election and up until 2 p.m. on election day, a temporary resident of your healthcare facility may designate someone to be an agent for him or her. That voter is going to authorize in writing who that agent is, and that authorization will direct that agent to come to our county offices, pick up and return a ballot for that voter, and then bring that ballot back to the county offices no later than 3 p.m. on election day. That's the agent delivery process, specific forms that'll be completed there, and again, that is for temporary residents of your facility. If we're outside of that 7-day window, these temporary residents can request an absentee ballot be mailed to them. They can vote from the convenience of their rooms, their accommodations at your facility, and then return the ballot to us by mail. But remember, this is a process only for the temporary residents, not the folks that are considering themselves permanent residents of your facility. The permanent residents of your facility can participate in the healthcare facility outreach voting. And if we want to define what that means, this is the responsibility that our municipal clerks, so that means our clerks of the city of Mapleton, as well as the city of Mankato, who the Blue Earth County Elections Office fills that duty for it, and then also for our South Bend Township facility, where we have a responsibility to schedule time for individuals to provide outreach at the facility to help permanent residents of those healthcare facilities complete the voting process. Normally this is election judges coming into the facility and working with facility staff such as residence managers, program activity directors, or whatnot to provide this service. However, because of our special conditions in 2020, we can actually just train staff members of the facility to do this important work themselves. But as I've mentioned, the healthcare facility outreach is going to occur during a 20-day window. That 20-day window is immediately preceding the election, and it's going to be completed and administered by our office or by city clerks who are in those capacities. This outreach can occur in facilities that are allowed by law, and this is most commonly thought of as nursing homes, but it also does include hospitals, residential treatment facilities or centers, and other institutions that are licensed under Minnesota Human Services Department. If you want to know the actual specific statutory definition of the facility, you can see that here on your screen. Like I said, the way we want to think about this is essentially it is our nursing homes, but it does extend to other facilities. However, the nursing homes are the facilities that most frequently have permanent residents that would be able to vote under the healthcare facility outreach voting process. Alrighty, I'm going to put in a very quick pause here just to talk about some of the challenges that COVID-19 and the coronavirus is going to present to us in 2020. We know that residents of these facilities that would be participating in healthcare facility outreach are extremely vulnerable to the virus, and we want to do everything in our power to protect their safety and well-being. And what that means is the legislature has allowed us to train staff members of the facility to complete the healthcare facility outreach voting process. That is a very, very beneficial change in law for 2020 for us because it allows us to reduce the number of folks that will be coming into the facilities and potentially bringing or spreading germs or viruses. So we're very, very fortunate and very grateful for our staff members of these facilities who have stepped up to help us provide this service. What will end up happening is if we need to bring in actual healthcare facility election judges who are not staff members, we will make sure that they follow all guidelines of your facility, wear masks, wash hands, and make sure that they're keeping all of their equipment sanitized. We would expect our staff members of the facilities who are participating in healthcare facility outreach to do the same. However, we do expect you to follow your own facility rules, and we're certain that your guidelines in place at your facilities are doing everything they can to keep folks safe and as well as possible. Alrighty, so again, normally these slides would refer to our election judges who will be coming into the facilities, so they don't directly apply to our staff members of the facilities who will be conducting healthcare outreach voting. However, I want to provide them to you as reminders, even if you are a staff member of the facility, because they're things you might not think of. First off, we want to make sure that you remember to dress comfortably like you would for a normal day of work at your facilities. The one difference here is we need to make sure that your clothing does not contain messages that would be political in nature. Under Minnesota law, our election judges cannot have any campaign materials on or in terms of clothing or other paraphernalia. That would mean anything that's tied to a candidate, a question, or a party that would be on the ballot that you're helping your facility residents vote. So just make sure that your clothing is professional and does not pass along any messages that would be prohibited on election day. Also, obviously be prepared with information from our clerk's office in case you need to reach out to us with any questions, and then make sure you have any of the tools and resources you would need to do your job. You may or may not be able to take lunch breaks depending on how you're staffing your healthcare facility outreach and how busy you are, so just plan for that appropriately. And then also a friendly reminder for our facility staff members who are helping us out. We know this is an added responsibility to your normal workday, and so we want to make sure that you prepare for it. Prepare the materials that you'll need early in your day of healthcare facility voting or the day before, and then also just make sure that you're prepared for what could be a long day depending on the number of residents that choose to participate in the specific circumstances that might present themselves with those residents as they try to vote. So if you have other duties that can be reassigned for the day, just make sure you're dedicating adequate time to complete the healthcare facility outreach activities. We will help you out by providing supplies. The supplies that you'll receive will come in a container that you'll use to hold and transport all of your healthcare facility outreach materials on the day that you're providing the healthcare facility voting. We would normally provide identification badges for our healthcare facility election judges. However, since you'll be a staff member of the facility, this won't be as critical as we won't need to identify ourselves as visitors. We're also going to make sure you have all the forms that you need. This includes the absentee ballot applications to request a ballot. It'll include the election day voter registration applications, which will be required for folks that are not pre-registered. And we'll also have a form to record any vouching activities that are occurring. We'll describe these forms in more detail as we work through the procedures. You'll of course get ballots. Those ballots need to be kept secure. Those ballots must be returned to our office, either voted and in the envelope process that we'll describe, or any ballots that are not voted need to come back to us. Blank ballots cannot remain in the healthcare facility. And then we'll also have the opportunity for ballots that are spoiled, mistakes were made on them, they're no longer readable by a machine because of a spill or a tear. Those are spoiled ballots, and those will also need to come back to us. Finally, we're going to provide some lists to you. These lists will be provided in the same container with all your other supplies, and they'll help you identify voters who are registered at your facility. They'll provide you with other forms that you'll record actions in your polling place. All of those sorts of things will be made available to you as well, and again, instructions will be provided so you know how to use them. Okay. A little bit more specifically, the form that you'll want to pay very close attention to in your packet of materials is what's called the master list. The master list is going to be a list of registered voters, and they're registered voters who reside at the address at which your facility is located. And that list is what you're going to use to help you figure out if the voter is pre-registered, and can go straight to the application and voting process, or if they're non-registered and they have to go through the voter registration application process first before we can actually complete the application process for the ballot and the voting process. Might sound a little confusing now. We'll break those down step by step, and that'll make more sense for you as we go through this training. We just want you to be aware of that list and its importance in helping you identify which voters are registered versus which voters are not registered. Another important feature of that master list is it will indicate whoever has had a ballot accepted already. And the reason that's important for you is in case you have a resident who tries to participate or wants to participate during your healthcare facility outreach day. That voter might be confused or might have forgotten that he or she has already voted. But if they've already voted and their name is checked off on that master list, we want to make sure that they do not vote again. As they already have a ballot that's been accepted by the county. Okay. In your supplies that you'll have available to you, you will have envelopes. You'll have what are called ballot secrecy envelopes. These are brown envelopes that the voted ballots will go in. That brown secrecy envelope with the ballot enclosed will then get put inside of what's called a signature envelope. We also call those number 2 envelopes in Blue Earth County based on the number that's listed on them. These are the envelopes that the voter signs, attesting to the fact that they're eligible to vote and that they've completed the voter process. It's important to note that there are 2 versions of these envelopes. One is for registered voters and the other is for non-registered voters. And again, we'll explain the differences here. You'll notice that becomes a frequent theme, that we have a process for folks that are pre-registered and we have a process for folks that need to register through the healthcare facility outreach activity themselves. You'll have instructions for both of these processes. You'll have an incident log. That incident log is what you'll document anything that's out of the norm that you're experiencing through your healthcare facility outreach activities. That gets returned to our office as a record-keeping process. So that we can document anything that we might need to go back and revisit at a later day as part of the election activities. You'll also have I voted stickers. Those are usually very important to our voters, and we want to make sure we can make that available so that people who are voting through the healthcare facility process can experience an election day just like others would in the polling places. In some instances, table booths are provided so that the voter can vote in private. We do not make table booths available for our healthcare facility outreach. We just encourage and require you to make sure those voters can vote in private as they're casting their ballots. Okay. I already talked about this a little bit, and I think we can skip by this pretty quickly. Not that it's not important, but because we're relying on healthcare facility staff members, we know you understand the importance of washing hands, sanitizing hands, following guidelines, especially the guidelines of our health professionals and your facilities directly. We want to make sure that we're keeping folks as safe as possible. One thing that we will remind you is that you'll want to disinfect surfaces that you're using in the voting process very frequently, especially if you have many residents moving through the voting process and using the same table one after another to complete their ballot voting process or whatnot. Just pay attention to those things, much like you've been thinking about them for the last several weeks and months. They just apply to the elections world as well. I am going to also make a point here that if we are utilizing hand sanitizer, which we strongly encourage and I fully expect is being utilized thoroughly in your facilities, we want to make sure that our hands are completely dry of that sanitizer before we start handling ballots. The reason for this is that if we would get a wet spot or a stain on the ballot, that might damage it and make it unreadable by our machines. If that becomes a problem, we can spoil out that ballot and we can issue that healthcare facility voter a replacement. That's totally fine, but just really watch your hands to make sure that they're dry after you've washed them or applied hand sanitizer. We'll also encourage you to space out your voters as much as possible, probably much like you're already doing in your facilities to keep folks separated and safe. And then also the I voted stickers that we're providing will come pre-cut so that you can make them available for a voter to pick up rather than have them pull it off of a common dispenser. Alrighty, and with that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into some of the duties that are going to be specifically assigned to our healthcare facility folks. This next series of slides is going to talk about it in terms of being an election judge versus being a healthcare facility employee. Like I said, in previous elections, we would actually have election judges who have been additionally trained come into the facilities and help us with healthcare facility outreach. However, due to 2020 and COVID, we are having healthcare facility employees complete this process. So while it's going to be a little bit different for our facility staff members, the rules are essentially the same, and I want you to think of yourself as not only an election judge, but also a healthcare facility employee. So obviously we're going to have you trained. That's our first and foremost responsibility. And then we're going to make sure that you're prepared for your healthcare facility outreach day by confirming when you're picking up materials, when you're going to return the materials, and just any of the other logistics to have ready for the day that you're actually going to be completing the healthcare facility voting. Your duties in a nutshell will include providing an application to the voter, because in order to vote under healthcare facility outreach, the voter must request the ballot formally by completing an application. Once that application is completed and it has been validated that all the fields that are required are done, we can then issue that person an absentee ballot, and that absentee ballot can be voted by that healthcare facility resident. We'll provide any level of assistance that that voter might need or request, and when they're done voting that ballot, it's going to be returned to us in those envelopes that we described earlier, the brown secrecy envelope and then in the signature envelope. The signature envelope is also going to be filled out. Our healthcare facility staff members or judges can assist with that process. And then once that is all packed up and sealed in their envelopes, it'll be returned to us in the supply kit that we'll be providing you for your healthcare facility outreach day. Okay. So let's dive a little bit more specifically into each of these steps. The first one being the application for the absentee ballot. As I mentioned, every voter who wants to participate in healthcare facility outreach must complete an absentee ballot application, and it can be completed on the day of the healthcare facility outreach or in advance. We would strongly encourage you to have folks complete these applications prior to the day of healthcare facility outreach, because it is going to speed up your process, and it's also going to allow us to help you out more effectively, because we can do a lot of the work in advance for you in terms of getting envelopes pre-labeled and everything like that. So once you pick your day for healthcare facility outreach, we'd encourage you to work with our staff in the week or 2 weeks prior to get them all, get all the residents who are interested pre-registered and also get their applications completed. We'll walk you through that process, or you can utilize www.mnvotes.org to complete the absentee ballot application process. The application is essentially going to require the voter to provide their name, their date of birth, and their identifying information. This could be a driver's license or identification card number, or the last 4 digits of their social security number. If a voter does not have either of these, they can make an affirmation that they don't have either of those numbers and still complete the process. The application is also going to require a residential address. This gets confusing for some of our applicants as well as some of our healthcare facility staff members. The residential address that's provided is what is the permanent address for the voter as of the election for election purposes. So because the voter is participating in healthcare facility outreach, their residential address is going to be the address of the facility they're residing at. But remember, that must be considered the voter's permanent address. So if you have a resident of the facility who is only there on a very temporary basis, will not want to use healthcare facility outreach process because they're a temporary residence, they should be completing the agent delivery process or requesting an absentee ballot by mail. So let me say that one more time because it's very important. The residential address on these applications for healthcare facility outreach purposes is the permanent address of that voter. That permanent address should be the residential facility's address because that voter is voting through the healthcare facility process. If they are not a permanent resident, if they are using this facility as a temporary residence for recovery, then they should be voting under the absentee voting process by mail or by agent delivery. Another friendly reminder with those residential addresses at your facility, let's be sure to include any sort of apartment or unit numbers that might be necessary to ensure that that voter could get mail. So it's whatever address they would be getting mail at that facility. So we've already talked about the application needing the voter's name, date of birth, and identification information. We talked about the residential address that needs to be provided on the application. So now let's talk about the voter's signature. This is also something that causes some confusion for some of our voters and for some of our folks that help complete the application. And it's because the voter's signature is what must appear on the application. What gets confusing about that is that it's the name of the voter that must be signed, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the voter has to sign it himself or herself. If the voter is not able to complete the signature process, somebody else may sign on behalf of that voter in the presence of that voter, but that person who's helping with the signature must sign the voter's name. We always need to see the voter's name in the signature line. If we do have somebody providing assistance in signing on behalf of the voter, after that person signs the voter's name, we're going to have that assister sign their own name on that signature line so that we can document the fact that somebody else actually did the signing. But remember, the most important thing there is it needs to be the signature of the voter who is requesting the ballot that is on the signature line. I also want to point out that power of attorney does not apply in voting in Minnesota, so somebody can't sign as power of attorney and say that has the same effect as the voter's signature. That doesn't work. That person also can't just complete the voting process for somebody. That doesn't work. It is still the voter completing the process. They just might have people providing them assistance. So can't say that enough. It's super important to make sure that the voter's name is what is on the signature line, whether or not it's the voter signing it or somebody is signing the voter's name on their behalf. Okay, so we now have the application completed. We have the name, the date of birth, the residential address, which would be the facility's address. We have a signature of the voter, either signed by them or signed by somebody on their behalf using their name. Now let's take that application and figure out what we do with it. As a healthcare facility staff member or election judge, you need to determine if that voter who completed that application is pre-registered or needs to register on election day. You'll know very quickly if that voter is registered because you're going to go to that master list that we'll provide to you that I described earlier, and you're going to see if that voter's name is listed on there. If that voter's name and address is listed on that master list, that person is registered and they will be voting under the registered absentee ballot material process. If you can't find that voter's name on your list, or that voter's name is on your list but there is a flag that says challenged, then we're going to need to complete the non-registered materials process. We're going to ultimately have that voter vote just like a registered voter is. There's just one extra step in there for non-registered voters, and that includes completing an election day registration application. Okay. The application is going to again be completed by anybody who's not on your master list or who might be listed as challenged on that roster, that master list we provide to you. And that voter registration application is going to need to be completed by the voter. And we complete that application because we need to prove that voter's identity and their place of residence. That voter registration application can be filled out by somebody else on behalf of that voter, but again, we need that voter's signature or somebody signing the voter's name for that voter. There's also a section on that form for our election judges or our healthcare facility staff members to complete. That section is where you're going to identify the proof that you looked at and verified in order to make sure that that voter was eligible and could complete the application. And then there's also going to be a section on the envelopes that these voters will be using that requires a witness to document that they also verified the proof of eligibility for that voter. So a couple of extra steps there for our non-registered voters. It's really important to make sure that we get all of our voters pre-registered if we can. So as I mentioned, that we're going to use mnvotes.org to register people. If somebody comes to you and wants to participate in healthcare facility outreach, we're going to ask them if they're registered. If there's any doubt at all, we're going to get them registered, because if we can do that prior to the day of the healthcare facility voting at your location, you're going to have a much easier process for them because they'll be pre-registered. All right, so how do we prove their residence and their identity? We can do that in a multitude of ways in Minnesota, and some of these are going to be more applicable to your circumstances at the healthcare facilities. Quite frequently in Minnesota, folks are going to prove their residence and identity with a valid Minnesota driver's license or ID card that has their residential address on there. However, we know that's going to be a challenge for many of the residents at your facilities because they either won't have a driver's license or they won't have a driver's license that has their current address on it. If that's the case, we can look at these other options. That would include a tribal ID card. It would require, or it could be a valid registration at a different address in that precinct. It could be a notice of late registration. Those are some of our other common ways to verify identity in residents. However, those are also going to be a challenge for your facility residents. What's likely going to be the best way for you to register voters on your healthcare facility voting day is to have that voter be vouched for. And that's what these next two bullets talk about. Under Minnesota law, a voter can be vouched for in order to prove their identity and their residential address by somebody who lives in that same precinct with them, who is pre-registered, or they can be vouched for by an employee of the residential facility who can confirm that that resident does live in that facility. Those are both called vouching, and they're both very acceptable and most commonly the way that we have residences of these facilities register on election day. We do have the ability to do a combination of the above, but like I said, the most common way here is for vouching, and so that's what we're going to spend the most time talking about. The vouching, as I said, can occur in two ways. Either a registered voter who also lives in the facility can vouch for one of their facility mates or neighbors in the facility, or what's going to be more likely in our current situation is that the employee will be providing the vouching. If the employee provides the vouching, the employee's name either needs to be on a certified list or they just have to have an ID present or have a letter from their manager. So again, because of our current circumstances with COVID-19, our facility staff members are likely going to be providing the healthcare facility outreach, so you'll be able to serve as the voucher for those voters. I want you to note that you can serve for an unlimited number of voters in your facility, whereas our other type of vouching process by another registered voter is restricted to 8, but you get to serve for an unlimited number. As an employee voucher, as I said, you just have to prove that you're an employee there. This is pretty easy because you will be working at the facility at which you're providing healthcare facility voting. Okay. Here's what the voucher form is going to look like. It is on the back side of the voter registration applications that you'll be completing for anybody who is not registered. Essentially, the form is going to be filled out by the voucher. So that's likely going to be you in the polling place. As a staff member of the facility, you're going to check this third box here saying you're an employee of the facility. You're going to name the facility, provide the address of the facility, provide a phone number which is required, and then you're going to state that you personally know that the voter's name is a resident of the precinct of that facility, and then you're going to sign it as the voucher. Then the election judge or whoever is completing that healthcare facility process, which may or may not be you, will then date and sign this saying that they were part of that process as well. What may work really well for you is if you have an assistant or another staff member available in the polling at your facility when you're doing healthcare facility voting, it might be helpful to have somebody else help you out by being the voucher so that then you can come in and complete the process as the election judge. Just helps divide up those tasks a little bit for you. I just also want to note that if you would have another resident of your facility do the vouching for somebody because they're good friends and that's just the way they want to do it or something like that, they would be checking this first box saying that they are pre-registered to vote if they were pre-registered. Okay. This slide is a summary there for you. As I said, this is if a registered voter wants to be the voucher. I mentioned that they're restricted to 8 residents. Remember, this only applies to those registered voters. If you, as a healthcare facility staff member, are serving as the voucher, you can vouch for an unlimited number of folks. This form will be provided to you. It only needs to be completed if you have somebody vouching for another resident of the facility. Because they're restricted to 8 people, you'll need to write the name of that registered voter and then tack through these and actually mark off these as they reach their 8th voter if they would be vouching for that many people. Okay. So that is our vouching process. So we now have the application completed. It's either completed fully and that voter is pre-registered, or the application is completed, they're found to be not registered, and so now we've completed the election day registration application. So now what we can do is actually issue the voter a ballot and they can complete the voting process. You'll find that many of your residents are going to need assistance to complete the voting process, and it is totally acceptable for you to provide assistance on election day in the healthcare facility voting process, just like you would on an election day in the polling places. This assistance should be provided by 2 judges of different major parties if we actually have election judges working in your facilities. And you can provide this assistance to any number of folks. There's no limit to that. We always want to make sure we ask voters if they want assistance. We should never assume that somebody wants assistance. And we should also make sure that we have consent before we would start filling out any ovals on the ballot for the voter. There's a slight difference there. There's a nuance there. Providing assistance in general would be answering questions, helping somebody understand how to fold the ballot and put it in an envelope. That's a general assistance, and that can be provided pretty liberally as a voter requests it. If somebody wants actual assistance completing the ballot, filling in the ovals, that's where we want to have very clear and specific consent before we do that. Okay. I also want to make a note that the election judges are not the only people who can provide assistance. The voter can ask for and get assistance from anybody in the facility. Can be a friend, a roommate, a neighbor, another resident, another staff member. It can be anybody that the voter chooses. So it might be helpful again for you to have that other aide or assistant helping you during the healthcare facility voting process so that you can fill the duties that are more assigned to the election judges, and somebody else can provide assistance in the actual ballot marking and answering questions part of the process. There was a recent court decision that allows us to have an unlimited number of assistances being provided, for lack of a better way to say that. In the past, that was restricted to 3 times for an assister to provide assistance to 3 voters. That is now unlimited, so it doesn't matter. Our only restriction at all is that that assistance cannot be provided by the voter's employer or an officer of the voters union. So probably not going to apply to our healthcare facility voters, but we want to make you aware of that. Assistance can be provided by anyone except the voter's employer or an officer of that voters union. If you would happen to have a candidate providing assistance, that is now okay. We'll make that clear. That was also part of that court decision, so candidates can provide assistance. And then we also want to make it clear that whenever we're providing assistance, we never want to influence the voter. We should only be reading questions and instructions. We're not going to provide input in terms of interpreting the question or what might happen if somebody votes. We're not going to provide our opinions. We're going to be very objective and matter of fact in terms of reading the contents of the ballot and helping the voter complete their voting process. There's also a note here on this slide that the voter may choose to have somebody review the ballot prior to them sealing it in the secrecy envelope. This would mean somebody might say, the voter might come up to you and say, hey, I want to make sure that I filled in the box for candidate X. And the election judge can verify that and be very discreet in that verification, saying yes, you filled in the right one, or no, it looks like you may have missed the target here. Let's try again, fill in the oval better, or spoil out that ballot and issue a new one. So we now have got the application completed. We've checked to see if the voter is registered or not. If they're not registered, we've completed the voter registration application. And now what we're going to do is have that voter seal that voted ballot in their secrecy envelope, and then that secrecy envelope is going to go inside that signature envelope. Our healthcare facility staff members, our election judges helping us with healthcare facility outreach, need to make sure that that signature envelope is completed properly. And that means that the voter's name and voter's address is listed on it. If you have gotten those voters to apply in advance for the healthcare facility voting process, those envelopes will come out pre-labeled for you to make life a lot easier for you. If you are doing this on election day without a pre-labeled envelope, you're going to want to make sure you add that name and address. And remember, it's the permanent address of the voter, so the address at the facility. And then we want to make sure that the voter's ID or social security number is listed on the signature envelope, and that their signature is there. Remember, it must be the voter's signature. It could be signed by somebody else on behalf of the voter, but it must be the voter's name that's being signed. Friendly reminder that if somebody else is signing for the voter, they're going to sign not only the voter's name, but they're also going to sign their name next to the voter's name. And then I also want to point out there that if the voter is struggling with signing, that's fine. Under Minnesota law, an X can be a signature if that's the way the voter signs. It can also be a hard to read signature if the voter is really struggling with that, but if that's their signature, then we can accept that. We do have a witness section for our non-registered voters. So if you're registering somebody on the voter outreach day using the voter registration application, then the witness section needs to be filled out. This includes the witness's name, the witness's residential address, or their title if they're an official. This could be the title of election judges if you are serving as the witness and you're filling the duty of the election judge. But we want to make sure this section is completed. We want to make sure the witness's signature is there. You'll note that there's a special provision for the 2020 state primary. Our registered voters do not need a witness. We'll actually apply stickers to those registered voter envelopes so that you know that that section doesn't need to be completed, but we just want to make you aware of that. And as I said, that's only for the state primary. The witnesses are not required for registered absentee voters. Remember though that the non-registered absentee voters still do need to have a witness. Also, I want to make it very clear that this only applies to the 2020 state primary as of now. There's ongoing litigation that may change this rule, so pay attention to the instructions that we provide to you, especially as we go through this process for the November state general election. We'll update that as to whether or not you can still ignore the witness requirement for registered voters. Okay. As I mentioned, the signature envelopes need to be completed no matter what kind of voter we have, registered or non-registered. No witness is required for the registered, but for the non-registered, we want to make sure that that entire signature envelope is completed, including the witness section. So we now have a completed application. That allowed us to check if the voter was registered on our master list. If the voter was registered, they were given a ballot and they completed the process. If they were not registered, we gave them a voter registration application. We completed the voter registration process, then we issued them a ballot. In either scenario, the voter cast their ballot. That ballot goes into the secrecy envelope. The secrecy envelope goes into the number 2 signature envelopes. The signature envelopes are completed depending on if the voter is registered or not, meaning do we need a witness or not. And then we are able to actually take that completed packet and make sure that that is safely kept and returned to the county election office so that we can count that ballot as part of the absentee vote process. You'll keep those ballots in their sealed envelopes and they'll be returned to us. They get returned to us on the same day that they were delivered to you and the voter marked them. So your healthcare facility outreach activities are going to occur in one day. Pick up your materials, complete your healthcare facility voting activities, and then you're going to return your materials. That's the way that the process is designed. We want to make sure we stick to that schedule so that we can keep a safe recording and chain of custody for our elections materials. As I mentioned, you're also going to have an incident log. On the incident log is where you're going to record anything or any problems you might have had throughout this process. Alrighty, so now we can start doing our cleanup. What do we mean by cleanup? We mean by making sure that all of our materials are returned to the elections office. We want you to return all ballots. These are going to be ballots that are voted, and they're going to be in the secrecy envelopes inside the signature envelopes. We're going to have you return any blank ballots. We never ever leave ballots or materials in the healthcare facility. You're going to return any spoiled ballots. A spoiled ballot would be one that maybe got wet with hand sanitizer, got coffee spilled on it, or food stains. Those are going to go into an envelope that's marked as spoiled, or just labeled clearly on the ballot themselves as spoiled. Those get returned to us. We'll take care of shredding those or preserving those depending on what the circumstances entail. But again, we want to make sure we never leave unvoted ballots in the polling place. We don't want to leave any of our election materials behind. Okay. The only exception to that, of course there has to be an exception, right, is that if an individual wants to mail back their ballot to us. If a voter wants to mail back their ballot to us, we need to stop the healthcare facility process for that person. If somebody wants to mail back their ballot to us, what we can do is we can have them complete just the absentee ballot application, and that voter can either mail that application into our office or they can just give it to you to give back to us. But we can never leave their ballot materials with them and then have them mail them back to us. Okay. What'll happen if somebody wants to vote by mail is that we'll process their application in our office and we'll send them by mail a packet of voting materials that will allow them to change that, or to vote that and complete that process. If that person had already requested to participate in the healthcare facility process but then change their mind and want to vote by mail, that's totally fine. Just remember, we can't leave them that ballot material that we'll have pre-prepared for them. They'll need to have that spoiled out and get issued something by mail. So the easiest way to think about that is if you have somebody who pre-registered and completed their application to participate in healthcare facility voting. If they choose not to participate on healthcare facility day or decide they want to vote by mail instead, we need to take that material back and actually just return that to the elections office, and that voter just needs to complete an absentee ballot application. Okay. My next several slides here are going to walk you through some scenarios or examples that you might come across, and we just want you to be familiar with those and be ready to address them. So let's start out here with a voter. This voter is at your facility and she's unable to fill out the ballot by herself. What do? Remember, under Minnesota law, we can provide assistance to filling out the ballot. That assistance must be requested by the voter, and we need to follow very specifically the consent of the voter. So we're never going to interpret questions. We're never going to try to lead, influence, or provide opinions on the candidates or the questions on the ballot. We're simply going to be their recorder. And so if she tells me to fill in candidate C, that's the oval we fill in. We're not going to remind them of the political ads we see on TV or ask them for party or anything like that. We're just going to read the ballot to them and help them complete it very objectively. Next scenario here, what do we do if we notice that a voter has fallen asleep while they're filling out their ballot? In this scenario, you're going to want to gently awake that voter, make sure that everything is okay, obviously, and then help that voter return to the voting process. If the voter isn't comfortable continuing to vote, there's some reason that they're not able to vote, then what we need to do is we need to find out if the voter wishes to stop voting and have that ballot be cast on their behalf as it's completed, or if that voter wants to stop voting and no longer complete the voting process at all. If the voter says, I'm too tired, this is all I want to vote, then we can put that in the secrecy envelope, complete the signature envelope, and that voter is done, even if the ballot is only half voted. If the voter says, you know what, I just don't want to do this at all anymore, I don't want to vote any longer, then we would spoil out that ballot and those envelopes would get returned to our office as part of the spoiled process. More scenarios here for you. You're working with another voter. This voter was not registered, so you had to complete the voter registration process, and this voter is unable to sign his name. What do? Remember that the voter's signature must be what we see on our applications, whether or not it's the absentee application or the voter registration application. So we want to have that voter's signature appear. Whether or not it's the best attempt by that voter to sign, be it an X or them doing the best job of writing their name, that's acceptable. Or remember, somebody else can sign the voter's name on their behalf. If somebody else signs the voter's name on their behalf, then we need to have that other person's signature as well as the voter's name in the signature line. Next scenario here, we have a voter. This voter is not registered, and this voter does not have proof of residency. How can this voter register? Can this voter register? So remember, if we have a non-pre-registered voter, meaning they're not on that master list, we have to complete the voter registration application, and the voter registration application requires proof of residency. If we don't have a driver's license or some other proof of residency, we can use the vouching process. Remember, that's available to us, and as healthcare facility staff members, you can vouch for an unlimited number of residents at the facility. And so you would be able to complete the vouching process to allow that voter to register and then receive a ballot and vote. Last scenario here for us. Actually, I'm sorry, I got a couple more here, but let's move on to the next one. The next one says that the voter has a guardian. Can they still vote? Remember that the voter still needs to complete the process for themselves, so a guardian doesn't come in and just vote for that person. The guardian can provide assistance, but we still need to have the voter voting. I also want to make a note that a guardian may actually be tied to a legal status for that voter. If that voter is under guardianship, then we need to make sure that that voter has their eligibility to vote. Sometimes the court will remove a voter's right to vote if they're under guardianship, and we just need to make sure that is not in instance for that voter. Let's go to a different scenario here. The voter's taking a long time to fill out the ballot. What do we do in that instance? The voter can take as long as necessary, provided that it's reasonable and they're not doing something just to drag out the process for some unknown reason. If they're just slow in completing the process, we want to be accommodating and reasonable with them to allow them to complete that. And if there's assistance that's being requested, or if there are any gentle prompts that can be provided, we want to do that to help that voter vote as comfortably as possible. Next up for us is what happens if a voter is just a temporary resident. Remember, we talked about that. If the voter is not a permanent resident and is not using the facility's address as their permanent residential address, the voter needs to not vote under the healthcare facility process. Our temporary residents of the facility are going to vote through the mail absentee process. You can have them complete the application still and return it to our office, or they're going to have agent delivery. Just remember that if the voter is not going to use the facility's address as their residential address, we need to make sure we get them a ballot that is their permanent home, which would be the address they would be providing to us instead of the temporary address of the facility. Okay. We have some yes or no questions here for you to work through. They're just other ways to think about the scenarios as to whether or not the level of assistance you're providing is appropriate. I'm going to go through just a couple of these here for you, and then we can move to wrapping up the materials. Here's the first four. If somebody has the power of attorney, could they vote for that person? As an election judge or healthcare facility staff member, you never want to make this statement. Remember, we only provide assistance to the voter to the level that they want that assistance. A power of attorney can assist somebody in the voting process, but we're never going to turn over the full voting process to somebody else. That's not an appropriate thing to do. We're also never going to encourage a voter to vote for somebody. So saying something like, would you like to vote for, is not the right way to handle that. Instead, if you're helping somebody read the ballot or fill in the ovals on the ballot, you're going to want to explain the instructions and then just matter-of-factly read the names of the contest, read the names of the candidates, and allow the voter to make their selections that way. We're never going to lead voters by saying, do you remember this person? Do you remember these commercials? While that might be helpful in trying to trigger a memory for the voter, we can't do that. Again, we want to be matter of fact and read the ballots and just answer the questions objectively. The last item on this page is something that we can do. We will want to encourage the voter to make sure they understand the instructions, so offering to read or reread the instructions is very appropriate for our election judges or our healthcare facility staff members. Similarly, would you like me to read the ballot? Totally acceptable to offer that. Remember, we don't want to assume a voter needs assistance, so we're going to be asking those questions. And then remember, we're never going to assume that the ballot needs to be filled out by us. We always want to have the voter try to do that unless they ask for assistance. We are not going to ask the voter their party. We're going to just again explain that there are multiple parties on the ballot and allow a voter to vote appropriately. This next question is also leading, so we don't want to do that. Remember, the voter can have assistance from anybody, so we don't want to encourage or discourage anybody from providing assistance. So saying something like, you don't really want your husband to assist you, do you, is not appropriate for our staff members or election judges. If the voter is choosing to get that level of assistance, that is fine. Similarly, we don't want to interpret questions at all. So number 8 here is talking about a school referendum question. Again, we want to just read the ballots objectively and make sure that we're providing that level of assistance as necessary. A couple more here for us. Would you like me to read the question again? We can do that because again, we want the voter to understand the ballot and make sure that they're completing the voting process appropriately. Next question here, which of these names do you like best? We aren't going to base voting on what names we like, so we don't want to approach it in that subjective fashion in terms of which name do you like. Again, we want to read the names, help them understand how to complete the voting process, and go from there. Question 11 is an appropriate question to ask. If the voter is looking for assistance and they identify somebody for assistance, you can confirm that that's what they mean by saying, is this the person you would like to have assist you with the ballot? Remember that assistance can be provided by an election judge, by a healthcare staff member, by anybody else in that facility. The only exceptions to that is that it cannot be an employer of the voter or a representative of the union that voter belongs to. Next up here, a couple more questions. Would you like help writing on the ballot? That is appropriate to ask if the voter needs assistance for filling in the ovals. Remember, we never want to assume that, so we always want to make sure that that assistance is being requested. And then remember, when we're actually filling in the ovals on the ballot, we have a higher standard to make sure that we have the consent of the voter to do that process. Next question here, do you mind if we fill out the ballot while you eat lunch? We would encourage you not to vote while you have food or drink on the table, so we would not want to do that process. Instead, we would want to encourage that voter to take a quick break there just to complete the process and then go back to lunch. Next up are some FAQs that we get in the office, and so we want to just run through these as they're going to help provide you with some common answers that you might need. Who can't be an assistant? Remember, we covered that. Essentially, anybody can be assistants. The only restriction is an employer or a union representative, and that's likely not going to apply to healthcare facility voting. Also remember, there's no longer a limit on the number of voters an assistant can help. So that'll be valuable for us on our healthcare facility voting day. What happens if somebody passes away between their day of voting in the facility and election day? In those instances, that ballot is not going to be counted, provided that we're able to remove that ballot from the absentee voting process. So our office does track that information to the best of our abilities, and we will try to remove or essentially we reject that ballot due to that candidate or that voter's ineligibility because they've since passed away. Alrighty, a couple of other FAQs for you. What if somebody wants to vote through healthcare facility outreach, but they won't sign the envelope? If they won't sign the envelope, their ballot will not be able to be counted. So we want to explain that to the voters, and we're going to want to try to figure out why they won't sign it. If they won't sign it because they're not able to, remember, they can mark any sort of mark on there. They can try to sign their name, or somebody can sign their name on their behalf. And so we want to complete that if that's the voter's wishes. If the voter doesn't want to sign their name because they no longer want to complete the voting process, that is fine. They just need to know that that ballot is going to be rejected. We cannot accept it without a signature from the voter or the signature of the voter's name signed by somebody else in their presence. Can someone pick up an AB for their spouse when their spouse is in the healthcare facility? They can't do it unless they're following the agent delivery process. So if somebody wants to vote, the healthcare facility outreach voting is the best process for them, or they'll want to use the mail process where the county office will actually mail them an absentee ballot. If neither of those options are desirable to the voter, remember they can have an agent deliver it, but that is in that restricted 7-day period. A couple of more here for us. What if the other election judge doesn't show up? That would be a problem normally for us, but since we're using healthcare facility staff members, we should be able to prevent that since this is becoming part of your operations for that day. Who can serve as a witness? Remember, the witness can be any registered voter, or it can be the healthcare facility election judges or that staff member. Also remember that for the 2020 state primary only, our pre-registered voters don't even need to have a witness. That witness is only going to apply to our non-registered voters, those voters who are not pre-registered. Also a reminder here, we hear the question quite frequently, what can't you wear? Remember, we don't want to wear any clothing or buttons or hats that would support a candidate, a question on the ballot, or a party that's going to appear on the ballot. So keep your clothes very professional and very neutral. Last couple of questions here for you. When there's a large room being used for the healthcare facility outreach voting, how do we maintain the privacy of each voter? We're going to do that by spacing out the voters. It's important to space out the voters anyways because we want to make sure that those voters are being kept safe and we're respecting social distancing, but that'll also allow them to vote in private. You could also use privacy folders. If you have any sorts of barriers that would help with that, that's totally acceptable. Covering up the ballot as it's being voted with another sheet of paper would be appropriate. Anything that you can do there to help that voter vote privately. What happens if you run out of materials? You'll want to contact our office immediately and we'll try to get you additional materials so that you can continue with your healthcare facility outreach. Hopefully by working with us in advance, getting people to pre-apply for their absentee ballots, we can prevent any of those shortages of materials by being prepared with the demand that you're expecting. But ultimately, if you're running low, let us know and we can help you out. Okay. This next slide here is just a review of the forms that you'll be working with. I want to make sure you're familiar with those. You are going to be using the voter registration applications for anybody who's not on your master list as being pre-registered. You're going to have every voter complete an absentee ballot application. They may have completed this in advance if you've done that proactively, and in that instance that voter's materials will be already pre-prepared for you in an envelope, and they'll be able just to move right to the voting process. But otherwise you'll have to complete the application or have the voter complete the application and then work through the process for them. And then remember, all of those voted ballots go in a secrecy envelope that go inside of an AB signature envelope, and that AB signature envelope needs to be completed. And there are two versions of that. Remember, one for the registered voters and one for the non-registered voters who register on election day. And here we made it to the last slide for you. Our last slide gives you the contact information. Christy Mays is our Services and Programs Coordinator. She leads our elections activities in many ways, including the healthcare facility outreach. The phone number listed there is our elections hotline. That's going to be answered for sure on all of our business days, so that would be the best number to reach Christy. You can also get a hold of me at that number. This is our general elections email. You can use that to get a hold of Christy and myself. If you have Christy's email directly, feel free to use that. And then I also have the resource for becvotes.org. That is our website that contains all of our election information. This training will live out there as well in case you need to review it at a later date. If you want to refresh yourself with the materials provided in there, you can find it there. And with that, I just want to pop myself back up on the screen here for you. Remember, my name is Mike Stolberger. With Christy, we'll work together to help you out with whatever you need to assist your voters in the healthcare facility outreach voting process. I hope you found this training to be helpful. I do want to sincerely thank you again for dedicating some of your time. I'm sure you're very busy right now working in the facilities and keeping all of your residents safe, but we really do appreciate your assistance in making sure that those residents are able to vote in a way that's more convenient and comfortable for them while also protecting their safety. Again, thank you, and don't hesitate to reach out to us if there's anything we can do to assist you. Thank you.